Hey everyone, welcome to another session of Conversations with Courageous Cancer Warriors. And today's guest, we're going to be talking about the little taboo things that most of us do not want to share. So I'm really, really excited. I would love for you to welcome Dr. Elizabeth Ann Wood. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being here today.
You're very welcome. I'm so excited to be here talking to you.
So we have this really amazing connection, first and foremost. I love the fact that I've met up with you and that you're able to be here today. And the topic that we're going to talk about is one that really does not get a lot of, let's say, time on air because it is such a sensitive topic. So before we get into that, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got to be a sociologist, right?
Yeah, so I have been a sociologist for more than 20 years now. I discovered sociology when I was in college. And I went to college not expecting to study sociology. But when I got there and I took a class called Social Problems, it was like I suddenly had a language to talk about all the things I'd been wondering about, all of my life. And a lot of those things had to do with injustices, inequalities, taboos, things like that. And so then I suddenly had a way to talk about it. And so that's how I discovered it.
Yeah, I love it. And this goes right along with the topic that we're going to talk about today that I purposely not said anything. So now you have family that has gone through this whole cancer journey. You've also written a book, and then you spend your time really supporting other people around this conversation of sex and intimacy.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear from you, in your professional opinion, what is one of the biggest challenges you see people facing?
I think probably the biggest challenge people face around dealing with concerns related to sex and intimacy is just the sheer difficulty we have talking about it.
Yeah.
The problems themselves, the challenges people face are generally solvable, but only once we can discuss them. And so the first hurdle is really getting over the fear or the shame or the absence of a language to talk about it. So I think that's my first concern for people, figuring out.
I love that, because I know for me, right, I grew up in a household where we kind of just didn't talk about feelings. We definitely didn't talk about sex and joke around about it. And so it's really limiting to be able to have that conversation. One, if you grew up in a household where it wasn't okay to talk about, right? It was kind of shy, we were a little bit more timid about talking about that. And then you go through this trauma, whether it's, for us in this conversation is mostly cancer warriors. We go through this trauma where our bodies are changed by our treatments. So whether that is dysmorphia from our surgeries, if there is a change in our hormone levels that are modifying other things, right? So it's really hard for us to admit that, hey, this is what I have going on. So what would be the first best step for somebody to start having this conversation?
I think the first thing we have to do is talk to ourselves, right? So we have to get some clarity about what our own experience is. Is it that I feel like I'm not interested in sex right now, and I'm aware that my partner is missing it, and so there's tension? Is it that I really want sex, but I don't know how to have it because my body doesn't feel the way it used to feel? Is it that we both, or anybody I'm involved with, that the sexual desire and the ability to interact is there, but it's painful in some way? Or is it that I don't have a partner and I don't know how to find one because I don't know how to discuss my cancer with them? There's a whole conversation to be had about how people handle dating while dealing with a serious illness. So if you're looking for a partner, there's that question too. So I think the first thing for people to think about is figuring out internally what's going on for me. That can be easier to do if you have a therapist or a coach or a doula or somebody who's helping you through this experience. And it's something that you can also do on your own if you meditate or journal. You can come to the core understanding of what's going on. Then the next thing, of course, would be to figure out how to talk about it with the person or people who can help. So if you've been discovering this on your own by journaling, maybe the next step is to find a therapist. Or if the issue is between you and your partner, then it's getting up the courage to say, hey, I have the sense that our desires are mismatched right now, and I really want you to know where I'm coming from, or whatever the issue is. Figuring out the next step is starting that conversation. Unfortunately, many of the people we need to have the conversations with are not experienced in talking about sex. So even if we ourselves are, then we are in a position where we have to kind of train the person we're talking to about how to do this. But very likely we aren't experienced either. So then we have to kind of muddle through, and that is really scary for people.
Yeah, definitely. And so how do you even begin? So let's first talk about if you have a partner and, oh, you're just trying to, one, understand where they are with this lack of intimacy that you might be having, and lack of sex, because for me, they're two totally different things. You can have a lot of intimacy and not have a lot of sex. So how do you, especially if you're not used to having such an upfront conversation, what is the best place for people to stand, right? Like who can they be in that conversation to have them be empathetic to what their partner is going through?
Right. So there are two pieces, I think, to what you just asked. And one of them is, how can I, the person living through the cancer, be empathetic to my partner when I might be having a hard time just dealing with my own stuff? But the other piece is, can I trust that my partner is going to be empathetic about where I'm coming from? Yeah. So I think one thing for people to try to assess before even starting a conversation is, how much can I trust that this other person, really does have my best interests at heart and is willing to be empathetic? Provided that that's the case, then I think the person needs to really think about, am I in a place where I have the energy for this conversation? Because at different points in a person's treatment, this just might not be the right time to think about talking about this. And there's just too much else going on. You're too tired. You're not able to really fully be present, perhaps. But if that's not the case either, so if you feel present enough to have the conversation and you feel like you can trust the other person to be present and empathetic, then I think the opening has to be something like, hey, I have something I want to talk about. I think it's kind of uncomfortable to discuss. Is this a time when you can sit down and listen and share some things with me that might be uncomfortable to talk about? That's probably going to set off some alarm bells for the other person. They're going to want to know, oh my God, what is this about? So I would quickly add into that, what I want to talk about is our sex life, or what I want to talk about is my concerns about intimacy. Being as concrete as possible and as clear as possible, and stopping frequently to check in with each other.
Yeah.
I think when we're nervous, we often have a tendency to just sort of steamroll somebody and just, dump everything out on the table. And then the other person is left kind of figuring out, like, what piece do I pick up first? So having a plan for the conversation can be helpful, I think, as well.
Oh, that's a great idea. And so part of what a lot of people are dealing with too is, there's the body image component.
Yeah.
Right? There's the lack of desire, especially if your hormones are turned off, it's not even a thought in your mind. So when it comes to that, when it comes to people having body image issues, a lot of us feel mutilated after we go through surgery. We feel that we aren't attractive. We feel that we aren't desirable. And we have to get to a point where we're loving ourselves again, which might take a lot of time. It might take some people years if they're not seeking help out to do that. So it causes, I love that you mentioned that it causes a lot of tension between people. So what would be a good way for somebody to explain, like, look, this is how I'm feeling, in the hopes that you don't get squashed, right? It takes a lot of courage to open up to be
Yeah.
like, look, this is what I'm dealing with. Especially if you're a people pleaser, where you're trying to keep your significant other happy. You're trying to, keep the relationship alive. And you're just really dealing with your own self. Like,
Yeah.
what would be some advice that you would give? I know I just threw a lot at you. I'm sorry, but
No, it's okay. It's come to mind right away. In terms of the conversational piece and talking to the other person, again, provided that this is a solid relationship where you have some trust and you believe that this person has your best interest at heart, then I think being as concrete and honest as you can is generally going to get you the best results. So for example, in the body image instance that you were just giving, if I went to my partner and I said, I know that I've been feeling like there's tension in our relationship because I haven't been interested in sex and I know that you're missing it. I want you to understand that it's not that I don't love you and it's not that I'm not attracted to you. It's that I don't feel like I love myself right now. When I look at my body, I feel turned off. I want you to understand that. And let the person respond. And it very likely is going to be the case that the person responds by saying something like, but I still think you're really sexy. I still think you're beautiful. I know that you have scars and you're lumpy in places where you weren't. And, maybe you're not feeling great about yourself, but I want you to know that I think you're desirable. Then it's back to you again, right? And maybe all you want is to be heard about not feeling desirable. Maybe you're not looking for the person to help you feel more desirable. It's okay to say that too. It's okay to say, thank you. I'm really reassured to know that it's still going to take me a little while before I can feel comfortable in my body.
Yeah.
But then the second piece is, how do you get more comfortable in your body?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are a couple of pieces to that. There's a new book out. A woman named Cindy Darnell has a book about sex when you don't feel like it, which is a really interesting idea because, for those of us who think about feminism and empowerment and all of that, we're very clear that you should only have sex when you want to have sex. Mm-hmm. Nobody should be able to make you have sex when you don't want to. And that's true, but it's also true that it's okay to agree to do something that you don't really feel like doing in the moment because the doing of it may make you feel better about it. So then again, trust is kind of part of the equation. So then part of what you have to do is be willing to go out and read some books, read some empowering blogs, listen to podcasts like yours, look at photos. There are some women who have been doing amazing work, putting photos of themselves out on the internet, post-surgery, sometimes completely naked, to say, look, I struggled and I'm beautiful. And this is my body and this is what it looks like now. I'm thinking of a woman I encountered many years back named Erica Hart, who did exactly that. And she had not had reconstructive surgery. She had had a double mastectomy. She had scars. She was very unhappy with her body at first, but she realized that one way to empower herself was to take these photos and then share them. And then she did poetry readings, and then she did speaking engagements, and then she became this kind of figure that other women looked to also learn how to feel better about their bodies and their selves. So I think, finding some affirming material like that, giving yourself time to read and do some research, and having those kinds of open conversations, those are all the tools that we need. But, we also need coaches, we need therapists, we need friends who are going to be affirming. We need strong social networks and supports. Nobody does this well alone, I don't think.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the resources you just mentioned. One of the things that came up for me is we also need to give ourselves some time and some grace, right? For me to get through that hurdle of feeling unattractive, feeling unlovable, right? Like you said, definitely get some support around that, but also start a ritual too, right? One of the things I did is I made sure, I went and I got my eyebrows microbladed. Like I went and did things that I knew were going to make me feel beautiful, right?
Yeah.
I would go and get my hair done. I get my nails done. Like the things that I felt made me attractive, I went and I had a photo shoot so I could have different pictures of myself looking, who I am now. A lot of people go back to who they were, but it's really about accepting this is who you are now, and you're still beautiful, regardless of what you physically look like. It also exudes from the soul, I believe. So for those of you listening, like, think about what you used to do before where you are now, and there might be some relief for you in getting back to doing the things that you love. Whether it's, for those of you who are going chemotherapy, maybe it's a new wig that just makes you feel amazing in it. There's a lot of resources available for people, but it also starts with the awareness of, what, this is how I'm really feeling. Like, you nailed it when you said, first and foremost, be truthful to yourself. And I think that having the support around, okay, this is how I'm feeling and this is where I am, even before you start talking to your partner about it, is really, really critical. So I love that. And I love that. And I can't wait to go and check out that woman you were talking about.
Erica Hart is the woman I mentioned about the photos, and Cindy Darnell is the one with the new book. And there's another book too that I really loved about, it was a memoir about breast cancer survivorship and sexuality partly. And it's by Beverly Deal. And it's got a really cheeky title. It's something like Sex, Drugs, Rock and Roll, and a Tiara. And it's about how she kicked cancer's ass, right? But she's also narrating a journey that has a lot to do with sexuality and coming to grips with her body again. And one of the things I think about when I think about this conversation around cancer and sex specifically is that there are some parts of who we are before that maybe we don't want to go back to. And not so much about like who we are, but cancer, like many other transformative experiences, dislocates us in a way from lots of things we used to take for granted. And one of the things a lot of us, particularly women in this country, in the United States, grew up taking for granted is that there's a very narrow range of what's beautiful. And we go through a transformative experience like this, it's an opportunity for us to reject some of those old ideas that really are no longer useful. I mean, they weren't useful initially, we just didn't know that, perhaps. Some of us were really invested in maintaining them, in fact. But this is an opportunity for us to say, look, I don't have to buy into that anymore. I can take the pieces of it that work for me. I can also look to all of these communities of people that have much more expansive ideas about what's beautiful. I think, when I think about my mom's story, and that's what got me investigating this more seriously, was supporting my mother through her cancer diagnoses. She had become involved in the kink community, particularly in bondage and domination and SM kinds of things. The kink community on the whole is much more accepting of a range of body types and appearances than the kind of mainstream heterosexual community is. And so she was fortunate in that way to already be embedded in a community of people who accepted the fact that she wasn't youthful and, well, she was youthful. She wasn't young. She had lots of wrinkles. She was a little overweight. She was kind of short. And she didn't fit the standard US definition of beauty. But in that community, to the people who were interested in what she was interested in, she was stunning. She was gorgeous. She was desired. And so going through cancer, which also radically modified her body in some ways, was a lot less scary for her. Yeah. She had a lot less rejection to fear than many others would.
And I love that she found that, right? I love that she had that available to her. And you said something that is really, I was having this conversation the other day about how proud I am of this new generation of women that are coming up who are just proud of their bodies, regardless of fitting the stereotype or not, right? Yeah. I live in Tampa. And so Tampa's a lot like Miami, where all things go, right? It's not as much as Miami, but it's getting there. And I've literally seen women walk around the grocery store in their bathing suits, right? Yeah. Like not caring at all. And at first it shocked me. I won't lie. I was like, what is happening? But then I gave it some thought where I'm just like, these women are just loving their bodies the way that they are. And we need more of that.
Yeah.
We need more of that, especially now. So I love this change in culture, this movement that is happening. And in one of the Facebook groups that I'm in, there's actually one of Sex After Cancer. Someone said exactly what you had mentioned earlier of, you know what, there might be times where you don't feel like it, but you know it's the right thing to do, especially if you love your partner. Like maybe as you go through it, it might actually become something you feel like doing, right? And it's a really bold statement.
Right.
But part of a relationship is really having that intimacy. And then for me, sex is connection, right? It's really making you feel connected to the other person. And that in turn will get you intimacy as well, right? They're not mutually exclusive.
Right.
So one of the things that I would like to talk about are resources, right? So we know that there are a lot of the medicinal creams that are out there that may support women. Some of the lubricants that are out there that might support women have estrogen within them. A lot of people can't have that.
Right.
So what would be some other options?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned lubes, because I think, like, if I had to pick one thing that makes sex better for almost everybody, it's lube. Like, if sex is good without lube, it's going to be better with lube, almost universally. When I was first getting introduced to sex as a young person, and I came of age, as I think a lot of us now did, with HIV. So condoms were absolutely required as I came of age with sex. And particularly sex with men. And so condoms had to go with lube, right? You just have to use them together. So for me, even as a young person, even as a teenager, lube was part of sex, right? So like, I think that's one thing to consider. And a friend of mine had said, too much is almost enough. That's how you use lube, right? If you think you need only a little bit, use a little more.
Yeah.
But you're right that you have to be careful about what's in it. Different lubricants might have ingredients that are not good for some bodies and are good for others. So estrogen is one kind of thing to watch out for. Things that can contribute to yeast infections. Some people are particularly prone. Some people don't have any problem at all. I think the silicone lubes are often really wonderful for people. They tend to be really non-reactive and they don't have a lot of other stuff in them. Some people are using these CBD lubes that have I haven't tried them myself, but a reputation for increasing sensitivity and things like that. I think with anything of that sort, you want to experiment in small amounts and see how you do. And if it's got something medicinal in it, then you definitely want to talk with your doctor.
Yeah.
And that raises another problem, which is, how do we talk to our doctors about sex?
Yeah.
Right?
Very, very awkward conversation, depending on your doctor.
Depending on your doctor, right. And so you may not know whether your doctor is going to be awkward talking about sex or not, because they've never brought it up. And you're going to do this the first time, and that's scary to do too. And hopefully you'll have a good experience. Hopefully at least your doctor will be willing to refer you to somebody who can tell you more than they can if they're not informed. But lots of doctors don't get much training at all, and let alone how to talk about sexuality. They just don't get much training in sexuality.
Yes.
They don't know a lot about it. So finding one who does is useful. One of the best lessons I've ever learned about this comes from a writer named Joan Price. Joan Price writes mostly about sex and aging, but many of the lessons are absolutely transferable. And she developed what she calls her medical mantra. And, I never get the words exactly right, but it's basically something like, doctor, my sexuality and my pleasure are really important to me. There are some things that are interfering with that right now. I'd like you to help me run whatever tests we need to run and figure out what I can do about it. And if you're not the right person to do that, then please refer me to the person who is. And it's a mouthful, but if you get used to saying it, then it's less scary to say it, and it's less scary to open up that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And and choose your doctor wisely, right? That brings up the topic of, if you are not thrilled with your oncologist, it's okay to change. It's okay to find somebody who you feel more supported by. The other thing too is, what happens with people who are in the dating world, right? I remember, thinking about that, of like, I'll be full disclosure, going through this process has not been easy on a relationship. And so everybody, I don't care who you are, everybody has a second thought a thought for a second in their mind of, okay, is this where I should stay? Should I just kind of let this one die on the vine? Like, you question everything about your life, including your relationships. And one of the things that came up for me is like, I don't want to get out back in the dating scene. And like, at least he knows what I looked like before. I definitely don't want to have that difficult conversation with somebody I just met. And it's hard and it's scary, and a lot of us dread it. So what would you say to somebody?
Well, the first thing I would say is, I absolutely get it. And you need to judge what you have the bandwidth for. Again, sometimes you might want to get out and date because you want a partner, but you don't have the bandwidth for what that's going to require. And that's okay. Don't do it right now. Then the question about when to raise a conversation, like, so let's say I am going to go out into the dating world. Let's say I'm doing online dating. Do I put in my little bio statement, my profile, that I'm dealing with cancer? I might not. You might find that you want to do that right up front. These are very individual questions, I think. And it has a lot to do with what you were talking about much earlier, which is being really true to ourselves. And one thing that we get to do as individuals in the world is set our own boundaries. And we can reveal what we're ready to reveal when we want to reveal it. But that is a very fraught territory to negotiate when you're dating. And I don't think there's one right answer to it. So I think affirming people's anxiety about it is really important. And I think there too, only revealing as much information as you're ready to reveal is really the key. For some folks, it might feel better to put it all up front so that you weed out anybody who's going to be, freaked out, turned off, whatever. But a lot of people might find it feels safer to establish some kind of connection first and then start to share this information. And, the information is going to be different for each of us depending on what exactly we're dealing with. Do I have warts and things like that? Do I have scars? Am I in the middle of treatment, or am I 2 years post-treatment? Where am I in the process? So in any case, these two are things that many, many people have dealt with in many different kinds of circumstances. So there are Facebook groups, like you talked about, dealing with sex after cancer or sex during cancer. There are groups for people who are dating. There are also people who have gone through this in different kinds of circumstances. I'm thinking particularly of trans people, people who have mental illness issues, and they've blogged and written about these things too. So, one thing I always talk to people about is Google is often your friend, and it can help you find people who are dealing with this too. And listening to people with lived experience is often better than listening to, somebody who just has advice to give. And people's lived experiences will be very different one from another. So we're not generalizing here, but we're saying, what's the range of experiences people have had, and what can I learn from each of those?
Yeah, I love that. And what's coming up for me as you were sharing that is, we also need to talk about, rediscovering who you are now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, you have to be a little open-minded, maybe, some self-discovery here of what works for you now, what doesn't work for you now, and also get creative, right? Create that safe space with your partner where you can kind of try stuff out and be vocal of like, okay, this definitely does not work, but maybe we should try this instead. I kind of feel people sometimes may not be so open
Yeah.
because it wasn't like how it was before. And now they may not want to share, oh, that hurts or that doesn't work for me. But we
Right.
really need to have this movement of being able to openly communicate with your partner what's working, be a risk taker, for a lack of a better way to say it, and like break out of that shell in order to find fulfillment for yourself and for your partner.
Yeah. I think looking at this as a transformative experience is really important, so that we don't imagine that what we're doing is needing to recreate what we've had in the past. But the experience has changed us. The experience has changed our families, our partners, our friends. And so we need to acknowledge that and then create new things. And I like the way you talked about risk taking. I think we can also view it as play,
Yeah.
that we just need a playful approach to this. Let's have a sense of humor about
Yeah.
sex. Our bodies are different. They make weird noises. They look funny. And if we're really hung up on those things and wanting everything to look perfect, we're not going to have a good time. Our partners aren't going to have a good time. So being playful is really important.
Yeah, I love that, because, you're bringing me back to all the things that we've gone through. And if I've ever taken anything like this seriously, I would probably be on some really strong medication, right? Like there are so many things of not being able to walk on my own, to open doors, to not being able to bathe myself. Like there were so many things that have come from experiences that have come from this, that if I didn't keep a sense of humor as I was doing it, I don't know who I would be right now. So I love that. I love that, this isn't something that it defines you in a way, but it doesn't need to be part of you. This is something that just happened to you, right? You're not cancer. You're not, you. So if people recognize that, like, what, this is just something that is just something you're dealing with, and it doesn't mean that you're a bad person or you're not lovable, I think people would have an easier time.
One of the things I wrote about in the book that I wrote about my mother's experience is that attitude can be really hard to maintain when we're faced with a healthcare system that really identifies us with our disease.
Yeah.
And so we do become, we don't have to become, but the healthcare system sort of often makes us feel like we have become our illness. And that is the only thing that is visible about us, which then becomes the only thing that is meaningful about us. And that is simply not true. So I really, when I talk to people who practice in the healthcare professions, one of the things I really encourage them to think about is, how can you pull back from that and start to see any patient that you're dealing with as a whole unique person who has a sexuality, who has hobbies, who might have pets, or kids, or who is interested in things, and they are not just this illness, because you can't treat the illness alone. The illness lives in the body of a person, and the person is complex. And you will be better able to treat that person if you are looking at them in their entirety. Yeah. So once we can do that for ourselves, that's, super important. But it can be really hard to do that when the people who are often, who have often the most control over our bodies aren't doing that. So we have to push back on that. And I think being a good self-advocate is a skill that we need to learn. And it's really helpful to have a caregiver friend or a family member, somebody who can be an advocate for us when we're in the middle of the overwhelm of the illness itself.
Definitely. And what I love that some centers are doing is have that multidiscipline approach, right? Yeah. So you're going to get a therapist, you're going to get a social worker assigned to you. So use those to your advantage, use the resources available to you. And then at some point in time, the resources are going to go away. So like with me, once my treatment was over, they're like, adios, see you in 6 months, right? Or 3 months. Right. I had to be a demand for these people. I had to keep seeking them out in order for me to continue on with my care. So for those of you listening, if you find yourself that you're without resources, then reach out to us. We're happy to point you in the right direction, or reach out to other people that you may have in your life that are going through something similar. So I absolutely love this conversation. I thank you so much for your wisdom and your knowledge and what you've brought forth here today. I'm going to definitely provide the links to your website, to, you know, how can people find you, and also to these amazing resources and books that you've mentioned here today. So Elizabeth, what's the best way that people can find you?
My website is elizabethannwood.com. So it's just my full name.com, and the Ann has an E at the end. So Elizabeth Ann Wood with an E. My book is called Bound, A Daughter, a Domme, and an End of Life Story, and it's available everywhere books are sold. So it's easy to find, and it's also on Audible now too. So it's an audio book. And so you can learn a lot about the experience my mother had, that I had caring for her, and also read some pretty intense critique of the healthcare system right there. And that, you know, can help you feel less alone too. And so, yeah, you can reach out to me through my website, elizabethannwood.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today.
You are so welcome. It was a pleasure to be here.